to Reclaim You. It is a week out, a little less than a week out from Halloween. So Emily's back this
Yeah,
week, our Halloween loving person.
I'm here for it. I'm ready.
Yes, we're talking Halloween and Halloween candy and how to navigate the abundance of candy that we're all going to be walking into shortly.
Yeah, it's a hard time of the year for sure. The holidays are, Halloween is just the start of the holidays. So this is definitely, I think, a big topic on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, it's like the beginning of chaos in lots of ways, of the holidays, of the running, of the foods that can be really scary. So
hmm
yeah, we're kicking it off.
I'm ready. I got my pumpkin coffee here. So
Oh, good for
my
you.
seasonal. Yeah,
You're brave drinking coffee in the afternoon.
I know. Listen, I was driving around. It was nice out. I was like, I just want to drive with the windows down and drink my pumpkin coffee from Dunkin'.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Do you like Dunkin' pumpkin or Starbucks pumpkin better?
Oh, it's a very hard question.
It is.
It's a very hard question. I like the Starbucks pumpkin spice latte,
Delicious.
and I like their pumpkin cream cold brew,
Yes.
but just the standard Dunkin' pumpkin iced coffee. I don't know. That might be it.
Mm-hmm.
It just hits different. Got it the first day it was released.
Yeah, I did too this year. I did too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I found that my Starbucks I can't order because always order ahead because I feel like I'm always running behind for my life.
Yeah.
And so I always try to order it and I can't order ahead pumpkin. They don't have pumpkin on the list. And so I have to revert to my standard unless I'm gonna stand in line. So I've been doing toffee nut lately, which is just delicious as well. So
That's also a good one.
yeah, so Halloween candy has been out everywhere for, I don't know, probably over a month at this point.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it can feel really threatening to folks who are struggling with disordered eating or dieting cycles or an eating disorder. The kind of looming Reese's Halloween pumpkin heads in the background. It feels important to kind of dig into that, into maybe what drives it, into how to handle all of the candy that's going to be coming into your life.
It's definitely hard. It's definitely a fun time of year, but a definitely a triggering time of year for sure. Yeah, I think it kind of thinking about just how much candy is around, and then especially on Halloween itself, it's kind of this unique situation where if you celebrate and you hand candy out, it's you kind of buy it in bulk because it's sold in bulk, and it's this scary food that's in your home. So it definitely brings up a lot for folks who celebrate.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of just the basic probably overarching diet culture, wellness culture view on sugar. That sugar is bad, that sugar is addictive, that sugar is the issue. Sugar is the issue, right?
Yep.
And I think from a different perspective for folks to consider is maybe sugar isn't the issue. Maybe it's something else. Something else.
I think that's a really important thing to talk about. Let's think about, is it sugar, or is sugar something that you don't let yourself have because of all these messages from diet culture? And then when it's around, not only is your body ooh, I really want that because I never get that, but that fear and anxiety aspect can come in too. I don't want this in my house for longer than tonight. So how am I going to get rid of it? And a lot of times those two things end up intermixing, and we can end up binging or overeating, and that feels really out of control.
Yeah. The concept of habituation, right, is I don't think folks talk about it a lot. Well, in the intuitive eating community, absolutely, habituation is spoken about a ton. But it feels really important to share a little bit about that, of the more you have something, the easier it is to have something, the less urgency you feel around it, and alongside of that is if you're struggling with disordered eating or diets, you're struggling with those things, you're
Yeah.
likely undernourished. And if you're
Mhm.
undernourished, there's a physiological drive to eat food. And when something tastes good and you're hungry, it's this, perfect opportunity for your body to be fed. Doesn't really matter what it is, right? Your body just wants to be fed.
Absolutely. And that comes up a lot in, obviously the work that we do. And there's always a reaction of pointing out, like you were saying, like the more that we allow ourselves to have something or have access to something, the likelihood that we're going to crave it in like that uncontrollable way is going to go down. But I know, like, just talking about that initially, like most people are like, wait, like,
oh, no.
That makes zero sense. Like, what are you talking about? But what you said is exactly right. Like, that's the work there. Like, we have to have those things available. We have to be nourishing ourselves in order to really move past that.
Yeah, it's the basic binge-restrict cycle that can feel so impossible to get out of when you're caught in it. It's so hard and it's so brave to find your way out. And then Halloween or Thanksgiving or Christmas or, any holiday that you're celebrating with all of the communal eating and the good food and things are, in celebration and they're nostalgic. There's so much built up around it. There's so much emotion built up around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking the holidays are really hard for a lot of people. So we're also then balancing being around family members that might be hard to be around, like trying to set boundaries with them or grief, like all these really hard things that can come in around the holidays that food comforts that.
Yeah.
That's a way to deal with those really hard emotions.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? It totally makes sense. So what do you think in preparing for Halloween next week? So there's a couple of options here, right? Like you may have not gone out to buy Halloween candy yet because you're afraid to have the Halloween candy in your house. On the other hand, you may already have the Halloween candy in your house and you're feeling uncomfortable and kind of like itchy about it. So let's go with you're yet to get the Halloween candy. What are maybe some tips or ideas or pockets of just being curious about going out and doing that and preparing to have that amount of candy that's, likely not something you have on a daily basis in your home?
I think if someone is at that point where it's like, okay, I want to engage, I'm going to get some trick-or-treaters, I want to celebrate, but they still haven't gotten candy yet, like let's just get curious there. Like let's take it slow. Let's even just think about what would it be like to go get the candy? What kind of candy would you imagine getting? Like let's just take it very foundationally first to try to sit with some of those uncomfortable feelings that might come up when you inevitably actually go get the candy, just to start to really be able to ground yourself in those moments of anxiety. Of even just thinking about it before going and actually purchasing it.
Yeah. So like feeling into it in a safer way, like an imagined way, and getting just familiar with what comes up around what you anticipate to happen.
Yep. Baby steps. That way it's not like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm like going to ignore all this anxiety. And then inevitably when I actually buy it, it's just going to hit me and feel even more overwhelming.
Totally.
Like, let's just take it slow and just imagine it and get used to those feelings.
And that like grounding yourself, like you said, that grounding yourself alongside of feeling that anxiety or trying to find some sense of regulation does feel so important. So it's like I can experience the upheaval related to imagining this or preparing for this. I can also feel even just like glimmers of regulation and calm, maybe pockets of safety. And then you might go right back up into anxiety, but at least you're kind of like working with something.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to come back to that moment of safety, even if anxiety spikes, being very intentional there. Like, it's okay. Like, I got there before. I can get there again. Like, I just have to meet myself where I'm at.
And then, so let's go the other situation where you went to Sam's Club or Costco or BJ's or whatever, Target, doesn't matter. You went to that place and you got the like big ass bag of candy and it's haunting you and you're finding yourself like elbow deep in the bag, and then you're in a shame spiral, and then you start restricting the next day because you need to get back, quote unquote, on track. Where do we go with that?
So I think even that, like, mindfulness is going to be important for all of this. Like, if that cycle is happening, like, let's get curious. Like, why is that happening? Is that happening because maybe you are restricting and your body's hungry? Is that happening because there is some kind of emotional need there that's not being met? Is it kind of a combination of everything? So I think that the first step is always getting curious about what is going on, so we can then take some steps forward to get to the root of what your body is trying to tell you.
And if it's restriction, that's at the root of it. It just feels important that probably removing the candy is a more restriction, which might propel you deeper into having the candy, right?
Absolutely. So I think with that, if it's more restrictive and your body's hungry, so you're reaching for the candy because your body's just trying to tell you, like, need more food. Yeah. Is there a way that we can add more? You know, we don't have to get rid of the candy. The candy is important. Like, it is important to keep the candy there so that your body can also get used to that. But are there ways that we can add in more nutrition throughout the day to make sure that your body isn't like, oh my God, I'm hungry. I need to just eat anything that I can right now.
And then candy is good. It's delicious, right? It's really good.
Absolutely.
And, you know, of course, that it tastes really good. You're in a state of like primal hunger, or even just the hunger, plain old regular hunger. Yeah, it's just going to do the job. It's going to happen.
And I think sometimes, like, the question can come up of, well, why do I crave sugar? Or why do I crave, you know, all the things that are normally demonized by diet culture? And I think it can be helpful sometimes to take a step back too and recognize, like, if your body is really in that hunger state, we're probably not going to crave, like, lettuce. Like, your body's like, I want something that's gonna nutritionally like pack as much of a punch right now as it can, because I need it. So it's not because those foods are addictive. It's just because your body's like, I need more right now. What's going to give me the most that it can?
Like, what's going to help me survive? Because at the end of the day, that's simply what your body's trying to do. Right? Yeah. It's just trying to survive. And then I think the other curiosity that just came into my mind too is being curious about the fear of eating the candy, right? Of eating the candy, of eating even normally or regularly during the day, right? I think what we know the common experience is like saving up your calories until the end of the night, and then like it's a wash. So being curious about that fear of weight gain, like Laura and I talked about last week, the fear of weight gain, the fat phobia, diet culture, wellness culture, healthism, all of these things that are in place that really propel people into the binge restrict cycle.
Yeah, I think it's so important to keep those things in mind, especially when food is going to be maybe a little bit more front of mind. Like, what are those internalized messages? Like, what is coming up, just so we can be mindful of that and hopefully in that process feel a little bit more in control. Totally. Like, this is something that was given to me by the diet culture obsessed world that we live in, not necessarily something that comes from me inherently.
Right. Like, I didn't create these beliefs on my own. Yeah.
Like, sometimes we need to just acknowledge that, like,
you know, and it's like to expect it, right? Around Halloween, probably about the time this podcast comes out, there's going to be a lot of like fear around the candy and how to strategize with the candy and how to get rid of the candy and how to freeze the candy and how to, right, do all of these things with the candy. And the paradigm that is counter diet culture is like, let's try to create some safety around the candy. It's going to look different for everyone. I don't think there's one answer, because there's nuance here, right? That we couldn't get into all of the nuance on one podcast episode, but there's nuance in how to create safety around the candy that's going to be different for everyone, while acknowledging that habituation is important, restriction is important, fat phobia is important. All of these things are probably going to propel you into a familiar cycle.
I think another thing that comes to mind just with Halloween and really with any holiday, they are so food focused. And like, yes, that's important that we acknowledge that and plan for that. I think that it can also be helpful at the same time to try to take some focus away from that. Like it is also just another day.
Yeah, totally.
All of these things are available. And I think sometimes there is a pressure of like, well, if all these things are available, I need to eat everything because that's what I do, like that habituation aspect of things. You don't. Like just because it's a holiday doesn't mean that you can't listen to your body.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think looking at it in that way, like it's just another day. I can still listen to my body. I can have what I want. What are other things that I enjoy about this holiday? Like, is it with Halloween? Do I like dressing up? Do I like handing out the candy to other people and like seeing the costumes? Do I like watching scary movies? Can we find other things about the day that bring us joy outside of just the food?
Fixation on the food. Yeah, that's a really great point. Absolutely.
It seems like it's become so focused on candy, and then obviously with Thanksgiving and Christmas around the corner, food has become kind of the major point, and doesn't have to be.
It can be this connection. And even the nostalgia of what like Halloween used to be like as a kid, or Thanksgiving, if it's your favorite holiday, why else, really sinking into that. Something else that feels important is talking about, so if you do binge on candy, right? I think that's going to be a lot of people's realities, If you do binge on candy, how can you take care of yourself on the other side?
Self-compassion, I think, is the number one thing there. Acknowledging all the reasons why. Like, it's a hard day. There is so much focus on food. It's kind of this perfect storm of a lot of times of fear food being in your home and maybe a bigger quantity than you're used to. So acknowledging the reasons. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with self-control. You didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
It's just a hard time. And then making sure on the other side of that, can we be mindful to not go right back into that cycle? Like, yes, a binge happened. We can acknowledge that. We can have our feelings about that. But do we have to restrict the next day?
Right.
Or can we just the next day give our body the fuel that it needs, regardless of if a binge happened or not?
Absolutely. It's like finding, if you imagine the cycle of restricting and then life getting hard and then binging and then guilt and shame and then you're back to restriction. It's like, where along that cycle can you just wiggle yourself out of the cycle? And I think you're right. A lot of times that is in self-compassion and acknowledging where you're suffering, how you're suffering, and showing up for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely easier said than done. I think also with that self-compassion, like taking that step to feed your body the next day is also very scary, but very important to really break that cycle.
That you're taking care of yourself in a really big way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that comes back down to like the self-compassion piece for all of it. Like, regardless of what your reaction is, if a binge did happen, or if it feels too overwhelming to even get candy at all, or if it's like I got the candy and I need to throw it away, if that feels like the safest avenue for you and kind of where you're at, all of those things can bring up feelings, can bring up judgments. Just really boiling that down to that self-compassion piece and meeting yourself where you're at and being curious.
Okay. Yeah, it's all okay.
Yeah, like it's all okay. We need to honor that and honor where we're at. And regardless of what happens, let's take a deep dive. Like, let's see what came up, what were the needs, like what were the factors that contributed to all that. We can learn from all of that.
And while you're saying that, I was just thinking about, this is why it feels so important to work with a dietitian or a therapist, because I think the internet can only talk about so many nuances of binge restrict cycles and intuitive eating, right? So I think a lot of people take this as a message of like, go out and get the candy and like, whatever, YOLO. And I think to be able to pull back and to work with someone to say, what feels safe? What's a baby step? What
Mm-hmm.
destabilizes me, right? What makes me
Yep.
feel too anxious to even continue with recovery? And
Mm-hmm.
being able to process that with someone and come up with goals and, like I said, baby steps to move
Mm-hmm.
towards habituation, to move
Yeah.
towards exiting binge restrict cycle. And
Mm-hmm.
really, at its foundation, addressing the restriction, whether that's deprivation of food or emotional restriction or judgments against the
Mm-hmm.
food, whatever it is, it can be so many things. There's so many different types of restriction. That feels probably most important. And of course, always
Yes.
questioning where that fat phobia is, showing up and
Mm-hmm.
landing, acknowledging when it's there because you are a human in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like that you pointed out the baby steps because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that is a lot of times what you see on the internet, and even, the saying things like, in order to kind of get out of that cycle, we need to have access to all these foods that we are restricting for whatever reason. But that doesn't have to mean, okay, like I'm going to go out and buy like every fear food that I have in mass
Mm-hmm.
quantities and like have it
Mm-hmm.
in my house, because you're right. Like that does feel really overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're working with a therapist and a dietitian, we can get creative and find ways and baby steps forward that are still working towards the same goal, but aren't so 0 to 100.
Yep. Like what's going to keep you engaged in the next step of your recovery from disordered eating? And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. It's totally okay.
Mm-hmm. So, like with Halloween candy, like if
Mm-hmm.
the idea of going out and buying bags of candy is
Mm-hmm.
not where you're at, what if we went out and bought like a candy bar, or break it down even smaller than that? Like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be so overwhelming if that's too much.
And, like if you have kids or mass amounts of children coming to your house to go trick or
Yeah.
treating, you may be faced with a lot of worry about like going off the rails. I'm using air quotes, going off the rails or feeling out of
Mm-hmm.
control. And that's really understandable. So I think the most important part is how can you feed yourself really regularly that day so there isn't this
Mm-hmm.
primal hunger shooting through your veins, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And how can you then do whatever you need to do to keep yourself feeling safe, feeling regulated, feeling secure? And all of those ways are okay. So, as we make our way through Halloween, we hope that it's a joyful day if you do choose to partake, and that you can feel empowered to make decisions that feel good for you. And here we come, holiday season.
Yep. Here we come, right around the corner.
Feels like a lot of conversations for future podcast episodes.
Yes, absolutely.
All
But
right.
one holiday at a time.
Yes, one holiday at a time. Let's get
Yeah.
through Halloween first, get through October first. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up?
I would just encourage everyone to, like you were saying, really tune into what they need that day. Like, let's make sure that we're fed well and the way that we need to be that day. But if you celebrate, just try to have fun. Try to focus on the things that you love about the holiday outside of the food, and just have a great spooky day.
Yeah, hit some haunted houses.
Yeah, watch some scary movies. It's the best day of the year,
It really
in my
is.
opinion.
I think it's a wonderful day too. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. We hope it's a good Halloween. We'll be back next week for another episode. So until then, take good care of yourself.